Languages, and this is where we talk about languages and language learning and all sorts of other stuff, and we play games.
This is Elise with an update on the ongoing Inessa Armand translation project. We now have 37 of the 38 extant essays and speeches by Inessa Armand translated into English for the first time, and we are just short of the halfway mark on the fundraising progress as well. This enrichment of the English language Marxist canon has only been possible with your support, and it's been a real lifeline for me. So anyone who would like to support this project can find links in the description for how to do so, and everybody who has already supported it has my sincerest thanks.
Perfect. Okay, 3 of 4.
還元一級の先というのは、本当に誰も知らない字ばっかりでしょうね。私は
Okay, we've leveled up, and it is time to pick another language. Morförrätter är en vanligt. Maten är färdig. And let's see what we're doing when we get back. Greek. We're doing Greek when we get back. Ben neredeyse her gün okula giderim. Fun fact. Turkish. Hello, Shakespeare. How you doing? Fun fact, in Spanish, the word for bishop in chess is alfil. And that actually comes from Arabic. Fil. The same word fil as this. Meaning elephant, because the bishop traditionally was to represent elephant units somehow. Similarly, in Russian, the word for bishop is squab, and that also means elephant.
This is Elise with an update on the ongoing Inessa Armand translation project. We now have 37 of the 38 extant essays and speeches by Inessa Armand translated into English for the first time, and we are just short of the halfway mark on the fundraising progress as well. This enrichment of the English language Marxist canon has only been possible with your support, and it's been a real lifeline for me. So anyone who would like to support this project can find links in the description for how to do so, and everybody who has already supported it has my sincerest thanks.
ça, ça, c'est ça, que c'est ça, non ça, c'est ça. Sol chi sa che nulla sa, ne sa più di chi ne sa. Ecco.
Bonjour et bienvenue à Hyper Polyglotting avec Élise. Moi c'est Élise, traductrice, éditrice et écrivain avec 20 ans de travail. Et ça c'est la transmission en direct ou en jeu des jeux. Surtout GeoGuessr en dernier temps. Et parle des langues, de la linguistique, de l'acquisition des langues.
10-159. Haven't made a huge dent in it, but we're getting there. Okay, gonna do some Chinese now. Night. Night. Come on. Yeah. Yo. 5. Ducks are drinking wine. Bangvaz, okay, Bangvaz is duck. Okay, I have now leveled up. Let's see what the XP situation is now. 10,340 out of 12,500. And as always, viewers can choose my next language for me just with a follow and a $5 to my Patreon.
Sotto le frasche del capanno 4 gatti grossi stanno. Sotto 4 grossi sassi, 4 grossi e grassi gatti. Un généreux déjeuner régénéré des généraux dégénérés. Un généreux déjeuner régénéré des généraux dégénérés. Facile. Sì, ecco.
Hello and welcome to Hyperpolyglotting with Elise. I'm Elise, translator, writer, and editor with 20 working languages, and this is the stream where we're going to be looking at comprehensible input and its discontents. Now, if you missed yesterday, Evil Dia noticed my channel and published a video tagging me in it called 25 Minutes of Me Being Strawmanned. And so we looked at that yesterday, and if you go to the VOD, you'll find I actually decided to put kind of a detailed index in there, since it's actually the first time I think I've ever actually had a response video made to any of my content, and I wanted to make sure that people could find specific things easily. What it amounted to was surprising. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to be accused of strawmanning Evil Dia on, but it turned out he felt that he had been strawmanned on because I said that he did not think highly of input-based methods. And that was a real shocker, because he has consistently expressed a very low opinion of those methods. I go into some detail about that on yesterday's stream if you want to check it out. It's, well, you know where to find it on YouTube. But in any case, it was also interesting because he talked a little bit about his background, and it turned out he actually has a lot less experience in the stuff than the confidence with which he expresses himself might lead somebody to believe. I am interested to see how this develops, but I thought we would look a little bit more at some discussion of comprehensible input and its discontents. And just to show that this isn't all Evil Dia all the time, we're gonna look at a video by Matt Brooks Green first called The Problem with Comprehensible Input. I'm quite curious. This is from a few months ago. It's been on my list to do something with for a while. I'm going to drop the link in chat for anyone who wants it. And yeah. Also some other links that I just drop in there. Project updates. Before we get started. Okay, so here we go. This is The Problem with Comprehensible Input. Now, I'm not really familiar with Matt Brooks Green, so I'm kind of curious what he's going to say the problem is.
Some people say
And as always, just let me know if the volume needs adjusting.
comprehensible input is the only way to learn a language. But if it is, why do so many people say it's a waste of time? I used it to learn Spanish and I saw genuine results, but also found out why so many learners get stuck.
Okay, this will be interesting. Like, because it seems like he's going to get into the subject of how comprehensible input is an ingredient, not a method, and how it really does kind of matter what you do with it, because there are so many different ways to engage with it and work with it.
In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what comprehensible input is, whether the critics are actually right, and what you can do about it to get some serious results. Before we get into that, if you want to jumpstart your learning, then Story Learning's Black Friday sale is on now, with courses in 17 languages at more than half price. The sale isn't on for long, so check out the link in the description to make the most. Let's quickly.
I don't know if that sale is still on, but
Comprehensible input. One of the dominant ways of learning languages was by drilling exact phrases and trying to avoid errors by being corrected early so that any mistakes didn't get ingrained.
yeah, I mean, this is what you would call the conventional methods. I mean, because apparently there's confusion about what constitutes an input-based method versus a method that is more traditional. This is it. The difference is between a method that relies on you understanding messages and developing a mental model of the language in your head versus a method that has you, essentially forces speech early and then drills you and corrects you and all sorts of stuff. And if from this drilling and correction, you are supposed to somehow learn the language like you learn to I don't know, like you learn to knit.
You can imagine
or something.
classes of students repeating phrases over and over again until they got them right. The origin of this was actually influenced by the psychological behaviorist model, which is a whole other thing that we don't have time to get into today. But some people felt that after years of drilling correct phrases,
I mean, and one of the key things to note there, without necessarily getting into it too much, is that it is based on a model that says that we learn languages the same way we learn any other skill. That it is like drilling and practice and stuff like that. That it is just sort of a purely empirical process of drilling and practice, basically. That it's no different from learning to knit or learning Fortran or learning how to configure OBS.
Still couldn't speak fluently or understand native speakers. Just repeating a sentence looks like performing the language, but it isn't the same as having genuine competence.
This is an important point, because there are actors who do an amazing job of performing in a language they don't speak, to the extent that you could actually get the idea that they speak it, but they really don't. But that is not the same thing, because the front end looks the same. The front end looks like you know the language. You're creating because you are making the sounds that the language is made up of. But the back end, what's going on in your head, is just you are making sounds that you remember, and maybe you remember exactly what they mean, but that is not the same thing.
People seem to be missing a key component, and so things started to change in the 50s when the linguist Noam Chomsky criticized this approach, saying that it couldn't describe how some people can understand and say sentences that they've never heard before.
Yes, actually, Chomsky's takedown of B.F. Skinner is I think it's later than I feel like that was the 60s, but it is actually kind of delightful.
And so if this behaviorist approach couldn't explain first language ability, why would it apply to a second language? So there had to be something that explained this.
And one of the things that happened there, part of the attempt to sort of salvage this as a method for second language acquisition, was the idea that you learn subsequent languages later in life in a fundamentally different way to how you learn your first language.
Idea of language learning in a way that was different from this behaviorist or audiolingual model that was around at the time. And that, my friends, is where comprehensible input came in the 70s. It was one of the 5 hypotheses proposed by Stephen Krashen and later published in his book with Tracy Tyrrell, The Natural Approach. And although a lot has changed in applied linguistics since then, they made the distinction between learning a language and acquiring it. So
This is all really important. This is all really important stuff, and this is a big part of one of the things that is the great frustration of watching Evil Dio when he talks about these things. And a lot of people who will say comprehensible input is a waste of time or whatever, is they simply do not understand the difference in theory. Because the thing is, if your theory of doing something, of what it means to do something, is going to determine in a lot of ways how you go about doing it. Like, if my theory of how to get a computer to do things is that I'm talking to a sentient being that understands me, then I'm going to go about it one way. If, on the other hand, my understanding of it is that I am that I'm entering specific commands that address specific aspects of, like, memory or whatever, to cause specific processes to happen, then I'm going to do it differently. You know, these are very different. These are very different understandings of the same task, and one of them will actually get the results you want, and the other one will be just endless frustration. And that is the fundamental thing to understand when we're talking. This is the fundamental difference between input-based methods and things like what you mentioned, the audiolingual approach, for example, where and other what I've heard also called skills-based approaches, where you're drilling grammar and stuff like that. The theory of what's going on in your head, the theory of the mental state that you're trying to achieve is different.
Contrast with just repeating set phrases, they suggested that language learning is more about picking up implicitly, so without formal study, the same as your first language.
Yeah, and the reason for that, and this is where you have to get into the weeds with linguistics, is that there is so much to know about any language that you will not find in any grammar book. There are all sorts of things in terms of structures and word order and all sorts of weird little quirks that exist in any language you can mention that are never discussed anywhere in any grammar book that is used to teach native speakers or foreign speakers. And yet somebody who is a competent speaker of the language will do these things and will basically never make mistakes with them.
Central to this is their idea that we acquire languages when we understand what's going on. Of course, that might mean words, but of course things like gestures, tone of voice, and context can give your brain clues to work out the meaning behind what someone is saying.
Yeah.
As you pick up more words from context, you'll...
Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead because I want to get into the problem with. Because that is what I'm kind of curious about.
For language learners trying to follow the principles from Krashen and Tyrell. But since appearing everywhere, there are now countless videos criticizing it and often saying that it doesn't work.
Okay. Here we go. This is what I was hoping for. I mean, that was a very good introduction, I have to say. I mean, really, no notes. Anyone who's trying to understand what the difference is between the sort of methods that someone like me advocates and the sort of things like memorizing stuff from flashcards or whatever, that description in those first couple of minutes of this video does an excellent job of explaining what that is.
Which is the nature of the internet. It's very difficult to have a nuanced discussion. Being angry, negative, or opinionated frankly just gets more clicks. So I'm going to try and be brave here and look at some of the criticisms leveled at it in order to help you learn a language better. We're going to look at the problems and practical things you can do to avoid wasting time on things that don't work. So I'm going to jump in at the deep end here because you've got things to do, and also this gets to the heart associated with Krashen and Tyrell, as I've mentioned, but someone else associated with it very closely is Professor Bill Van Patten, who I've interviewed on the channel. So for context, Van Patten is an absolute legend in the field of linguistics. Not only did he publish numerous books and papers, but he also had
with amazing hair.
A couple of radio shows where he shared language learning advice for teachers, and also created a comprehensible input show to learn Spanish back in the day called Destinos. But I think what Van Patten says gets to the heart of many discussions about comprehensible input and level. You're trying to build a network in your brain, supposedly in the same way that you did for your native language. The idea is that with constant exposure, you're making multiple connections between...
How's everybody doing today?
...different words and ideas, and then you can spontaneously put together new sentences down the line.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very key aspect of it. And that is the difference See, the reason that people will go through, years of traditional language study methods in school or university or whatever, and then not feel competent in the language is because at most what they've learned to do often is to remember certain specific phrases, and so maybe they'll understand those specific phrases. But the thing about actually knowing a language is it's being able to innovate. It's being able to just make up sentences that you've never heard before, sentences, and sometimes even make up words according to the rules that exist in a language. And one of the things here, let me just say, one of the things that I think proponents of comprehensible input could do better at, myself included, is talking about what it means for speech to emerge, because that comes up a lot. Like, okay, but where people will say something like, but okay, so you watch all this content, but how's that turn into speech? What does that mean? Surely you got to speak in order to speak, and stuff like that. And understanding how the one transitions to the other requires understanding what goes on in your head. And I think in order to get that across, it is important to actually talk about the experience. Like, because it has to do with spontaneity. It has to do with things starting to form in your head in your target language that you've never actually heard before. Like, let me see. What could I say? Pom chop gin nakrien. Pom chop gin nakrien. But ma. Like, I never heard that phrase before. It just popped into my head now. That's in Thai. That is the language that I've just really begun working with, using the ALG Thai course over at Comprehensible Thai. I should note, I don't have any relationship with them, although I've had a very nice exchange with, in their comments section recently. But I'm just doing this to test out ALG because I've heard a lot about it. The principles seem solid to me, but I'd like to try it out. And there are not a whole lot of languages that ALG materials are available in where I'm actually starting for zero, and Thai is one of them. And that is an example of a Thai phrase that just occurred spontaneously. I've never heard it before. It literally it is like expressing an appreciation of cannibalism, which has not come up in any of Krufa and Kruying and Krue's materials that I've watched. It is just spontaneously an absurd sentence came to mind, and it literally means, I like to eat students a lot. I mean, just random shit. But that is how you know that speech is starting to emerge. And the thing is, that's going to happen at different times for different people in different languages because of, like, the context that they're in, what they bring to the table. Sorry. How accustomed they are to the structures of the target language and all sorts of stuff like that.
Although it is worth pointing out that even a CI supporter like Van Patten says that there is a role for explicit teaching. That can help people notice some of the nuances that can impact the meaning of the language that they're learning.
Yeah, and this is really what it turns out Steve Kaufman call priming.
So, what the hell is language-like behavior then? Well, if the goal of...
But okay, I want to hear the discussion of the criticisms, though.
As soon as your phone runs out of battery, you get lost, versus just knowing the way, and alternate routes if you need to pick up a coffee before your final destination. In fact, I remember reading that one of the criticisms of Sheckman's language islands was that they create the illusion of fluency. Basically, if you stick to the script, you're fine, but you might struggle as soon as a conversation goes off track, which...
Although, I would say that is something that happens in people's native languages too. The minute you get outside of subjects that a person actually really knows a lot about, you're going to find a decline in fluency because you don't have the vocabulary to discuss the thing, you don't necessarily have the concepts. To a certain extent, we all have lots of fluency islands.
Is why he suggested that you try and steer the conversation to talk about the topics that you've covered in your language islands. And I think we've all met people like that at one party or another. The suggestion is that there are basically different processes happening in the brain between picking up patterns in the language through exposure compared with just memorizing phrases. But in fact, I think that this is where things get interesting. There could be judgment that one is better than the other and that one is good and one is bad. People can get very picky about what language learning is on both sides of the debate.
Okay, I'm trying to find where we get into the criticisms, because that is what I'm really interested in looking at.
Focus on what I'm doing to worry if people are learning languages differently from me. So what does this mean for your own language learning? Let's look at some of the more specific criticisms of comprehensible input. And
here we go.
To improve your language skills faster. As I've mentioned, comprehensible input is actually a really old theory and has been criticised for a long time.
Yeah, I have to say, I like his B-roll. I ought to shoot some, B-roll.
Some people suggest that getting exposure to the language is literally all you need to get fluent. Just like watching lots of videos, and as soon as you open your mouth, you'll be able to speak perfect French. I spent a long time getting exposure to Spanish, and I know from experience that it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, what kind of exposure. How much of it are you actually making sense out of? How much exposure are you getting? Yeah, you can if you watch a whole bunch of videos in Spanish and don't understand anything, you're probably not going to make a huge amount of progress, though you might get more used to hearing it.
And that is one of the biggest criticisms. People say that input isn't enough. That you absolutely have to do more things like learn about the grammar, study vocabulary, actively practice speaking. And here's where some nuance comes in, which I know on the internet is a pretty dangerous thing, but in considering whether input alone is enough, when thinking about the answer, generally I would say no, especially if you want to speak well.
And what I would say is it really depends. Yeah, I mean, each of these things requires a little footnote, because it depends on what input you're getting. That is important, especially at the beginner level. At the beginner level, you have to be very choosy about input to really get the best results out of it. But then there's also what you do with it. Are you just passively sitting there sort of zonking out and watching stuff and not really paying attention? Or are you really, engaged? Those things can externally look the same, but they're not the same thing internally. And that active engagement where you're trying to understand what's going on, trying to take everything in, and try to make some kind of sense out of it, that is really crucial. So the fundamental question before we even get into is input enough is what input and what are you doing with it?
A really useful thing I've found is talking to yourself a lot. You'll find the gaps in your vocabulary as well as reinforce the words that you already know.
I agree, and I would actually say that this is a good example of things that start to happen when speech emerges. Sometimes this will just happen in your head. At the start it may mainly happen just in your head. But if you talk to yourself, if you just try to say things, then that can be quite useful. You can start to wrap your mouth around it. And I would suggest when you start to feel speech emerging like that, where you start to hear, in your mind's ear, spontaneous formations of new phrases, new sentences and stuff that you've never actually heard anyone say before, that's a good time to start saying them out loud.
And you can quickly look up anything that you need to and then try and use it as much as possible. There's evidence that there are other factors you need to reach a high level, which includes more explicit knowledge about, say, grammar rules, especially if they don't exist in your native language.
One thing that's worth noting here is there are studies, Krashen has cited them a number of times, to indicate that one of the best indicators, one of the best drivers of improvement with grammar is pleasure reading in the target language, which makes sense, like just on a prima facie kind of level, because then you have the phrases right in front of you, and they're not like disappearing, they're not ephemeral in the way that speech is. So you can actually see the way that somebody has phrased, and sequenced a particular utterance in a way that you don't necessarily get to take your time with when people are speaking to you.
Spanish subjunctive, I'm looking at you. So, don't be a hero and assume that you only have to watch videos to pick up the language. The benefit adults have over children is that you know stuff. You can use your advanced powers of reasoning to understand things much faster.
Plus, I mean, there's also, this is where I would say that there is a role for early reading. ALG, which, I mean, I think this is partially a reflection of the fact that a lot of ALG was developed specifically to impart a language that has its own unique writing system. That there is a strong preference for waiting a while to read. Whereas I don't think that necessarily applies to the same level if you're dealing with a language that has the same basic writing system as the one that you're using, the one that you're used to. Because, like, if you're an English speaker and you're learning Spanish, for example, then there is definitely, I think, a serious benefit to actually seeing the things written out as you're hearing them a lot of the time, because it helps you link letters that are already to a great extent familiar to you with sounds that are not necessarily familiar to you.
On top of that, certainly I didn't realise how many minor mistakes I was making in my Spanish when it came to genders, because it never got in the way of comprehension. So doing something...
it's worth noting that the two things that he's just listed are things that native speakers get wrong a lot. The subjunctive is something that native speakers are often quite iffy about. Using the subjunctive correctly is considered to be a sign of refinement in Spanish, because there is so much nuance in it that a lot of native speakers don't get it right all the time. And the complexities of gender are actually something, if you look at like the speech of, and especially the writing of people who don't, of native Spanish speakers who don't have a lot of formal education, you will often see that these are things that they're not necessary, that they're making mistakes with as well. So, like, the things he's listing are actually things that are low-key challenging for native speakers as well. Because one of the reasons that gender works the way it does in Spanish is differences in etymology. And that isn't obvious to you even as a native speaker until it's been explained to you. And then you have things where the same exact word has different genders with different meanings. Like el frente, which means like the front. Like the front lines, for example, or the popular front or something like that. Versus la frente, which means the forehead.
So like journaling made a huge difference for me. However, I'm not saying everybody absolutely has to do the same thing.
I mean, really what he's describing here is kind of an adaptation of pleasure reading as a grammar acquisition method, except that it's more pleasure writing. But I think I think that makes sense when you get to a certain point.
If we look at the question again, is input alone enough? Well, it entirely depends on what you think enough is.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people have arguments on the internet, they're talking about different things.
A lot of the time, and especially when we talk about this. because a lot of people will talk about input, and I will say, like, I've occasionally made this mistake too, as if it is in itself a method. But the thing is, it all depends on what you do with it. But I want to see, like, we haven't really heard the criticism so much.
Extreme, and learn everything there is to know about grammar in a language, as well as memorizing tons of vocabulary. But then after all of those hours in front of a textbook, you might have no idea what people say when they're talking to you. The question then is, how much exposure have you had to the language at a level you can mostly understand? And then so the answer is comprehensible input. And I'll also add, how much are you enjoying your language learning? You don't have to hate every second of it, and it seems a shame to me that some people think that the actual language learning process is something they have to get through.
I mean, and this is like, occasionally I've said this, this is kind of where we see the damage done by, like, the Protestant work ethic. Because there's this idea that it has to be a grind. That that if it doesn't, no pain, no gain. Where if you don't find it to be at least somewhat boring drudgery, then you're not actually getting any benefit out of it in terms of learning. And that is really not necessarily true.
Which leads me onto one of the biggest criticisms of comprehensible input.
Okay, here we go. I'm curious what this is going to be.
So one thing you hear all the time is people saying that this comprehensible input approach is slow and hard to implement. So let's look at those each in turn, starting with it's too slow. Firstly, there is no way around it. To commit a word to your long-term memory...
Yeah, I mean, you do hear that one a lot. And the thing is, you have to compare it to something. Like, okay, yes, it takes time, it requires patience. That's all true. But the only way that's a criticism is if there is a method where you will achieve the exact same outcome or a better outcome in less time. And if you're not achieving, and if you're comparing it to something that is not getting you the same quality of outcome, then the criticism just evaporates, because yes, it takes time, but because then you're saying it just inherently takes time.
Regardless of method, generally you need to be exposed to it multiple times. The most common words come up all the time, but after a while, certain words come up less often, and so you'll be exposed to them less frequently, which means that it will take longer to get that repeated exposure to reinforce them.
Yeah, although that of course depends on things like the importance of the word to you. Like, you may not hear a word a whole lot at all, but if it's a word that stands out to you, that's particularly interesting to you, or is particularly useful in a specific situation to you, then less exposure may actually be plenty.
Now, loads of people use flashcards to get around this. Not to split hairs on this, but depending on the sorts of flashcards you use and how you use them, you could argue that if the input from flashcards is comprehensible to you, then it's comprehensible input.
True. And other times it can function as priming.
But there are various ways to get that repetition aside from normal digital flashcards.
And I will say, I mean, if you want to have a model for how you can get a lot of very useful repetition that reinforces structures in a language within an input-heavy framework, actually, Comprehensible Tie does a great job of that.
I hate Anki, for example, so I started recording voice memos with the chunks and phrases that I wanted to review. The problem is that after a while you end up with tons of voice notes and it gets hard to review them all. So a simple solution I found was to record your own voice using audio flashcards. There are similar apps out there. The one that I use is audio-flashcards.com. I will say I don't like the latest update to the algorithm, so I would recommend using their legacy algorithm, which you can find listed under experimental features in the app if you try it. Using that I can listen when I'm walking, driving, cleaning, whatever, and it gives me those repeated exposures that makes it easier to remember words. But I think there is something that's more important than repetition. Your brain is not a hard drive. You are a person with thoughts and feelings, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a couple of weeks ago we were talking about, it was actually that Kaufman video that Evil Dio was responding to. He was pointing out that there was this sort of file cabinet metaphor that a lot of flashcard-based methods were based on, like that it was just you were storing information to retrieve it. And that's just not how any of that works.
And you need to work with that when learning a new language. If you're doing supposedly the most efficient activity, whatever that would be, but you quit because you hate it, well then you've stopped. So that isn't faster than picking up the language through lots of exposure. For me, I think that one of the biggest risks for learners is that they don't stick with it long enough to see meaningful progress. And so on the one hand...
And also, what is this obsession with it being fast, really? Like, in how many situations are you needing to acquire fluency in a specific language fast? In real life? I mean, outside of, like, fucking, I don't know, spy movies or something like that, where is this an urgent thing? Where only, like, there's something that only you can do, and it requires you to be totally fluent in a language, and you'll only have 2 months to do it, or something like that. These are not real life scenarios. Like, why, where does fast come in? This is a challenging thing that requires a whole lot of, a lot of patience, a lot of exposure to the language, a lot of interaction with the language. It inherently takes time. It's gonna take how long it takes. There are ways to make that go smoother and possibly take less time, but what's the hurry, fundamentally?
Actively reviewing my audio flashcards is time efficient, but actually just getting lots of exposure to the language through interesting podcasts or shows is energy efficient.
Yeah.
So I can do more of it. Doing something simple like watching videos or listening to podcasts not only helps you pick up the language, but more importantly, for less experienced learners, changes your habits and identity. And over the long term, that is huge. It's hard to make real progress if you feel like you're forcing yourself to learn a language. But by doing simple things like enjoying content from comprehensible input style creators, you can change your perception of difficulty. And not only
and you can gradually sort of as you get better at understanding that stuff, you can branch out into other things that might be more interesting than that content as well.
over time increase the difficulty of the content you use to learn the language, but also do increasingly difficult things as your attitude to learning changes with experience. So the slow and steady approach of using simple content is actually really smart in the long term.
Yeah.
Habits and psychology are essential for success, which is why I made them the center of the course that I teach. If you don't have the right approach, learning a language will feel much harder than it needs to. So next.
The trouble is a lot of people need it to feel hard in order to feel like they're doing something. And I think that is where a lot of this conventional wisdom is so diehard. Because there is this idea that it's gotta be hard. Because if it isn't hard, then are you achieving anything? You know, if no pain, how is there gain, sort of thing.
Let's look at that second criticism, that it's hard to implement. Well, in the modern world, it just isn't as hard. It depends on the language you're learning, of course, as well as what resources are available, but you can often find tons of stuff on YouTube, or even going to comprehensibleinputwiki.org, where there are lists of resources available.
Comprehensibleinputwiki.org? This is a thing that exists?
Or even going to
comprehensibleinputwiki.org. Okay, that sounds amazing. Let's check. Let's see. Okay, this is already rewarding my choice of video. And I'm going to drop the link in chat for anyone who wants it. Let's see. Multiple languages. Arabic, Hijazi, Levantine Standard, Tunisian, Comprehensible. Okay, whole bunches of languages here. Let's see. Let's try one that might be a little bit harder to find resources for. Khmer. Natural Khmer. Where's this? Small YouTube channel to learn Cambodian. Okay, well, I'm joining it. Okay, so very cool. A great resource I had never heard of. Thank you, Matt Brooks Green, for putting that in the video. Like that is a wonderful thing.
Inputwiki.org, where there are lists of resources available for each language. On top of that, you can also use AI to write a detailed prompt and get tailored text and audio at a level specific to you. Even just a combo of ChatGPT, Notebook LM, and your imagination, you can do a lot. The main thing to remember is that
the thing is that you will end up sounding like an LLM if you do too much of that. That is really something to take in great moderation if you're going to do it at all. There are, I think, lots of better ways.
It needs to be at a level you can understand, which is why I don't tend to use the word
don't feed the clankers
immersion, as you can be surrounded by the language, but if you can't understand anything, it's not that helpful. Your brain won't have enough clues to fill in the blanks. Now, understanding can involve using context, but also translations to make sense of things. That's another tool that you didn't have when it came to learning your first language. So comprehensible input doesn't have to be a passive thing if you're trying to actively...
Yeah, this is really key, and this is a very common misconception, this idea that all you're doing is you're just sort of zoning out and watching stuff, and that's just not how it is. You have to engage actively, even if it is all going on in your head, if you're going to really derive the maximum benefit out of it.
Make sense of the content you're using. That's where transcripts and repeated listening to a podcast can really help.
Oh, definitely.
So
Absolutely.
Full circle, back to Bill Van Patten and this idea of CI versus language-like activities. He said that language-like activities are similar to the training wheels on a bike. In order to learn to ride a bike, you can use the training wheels to get going, but eventually you won't need them. And that's why it makes sense to use whatever you personally find beneficial, without losing sight of the fact that you need a huge amount of exposure in order to build up this network of data in your head.
Yeah.
So
because, I mean, one of the things, I was thinking about this a little bit more, because we saw this network analogy and graph theory and all that stuff. That guy, Nick, who I've not actually seen before, was explaining the difference between the sort of language acquisition and memorizing set phrases using graph theory in a response to Evil Dia. And the thing is, when it comes to language acquisition, the goal is not to find the shortest path between two nodes. The goal is to have the most possible valid paths between them. Because you might need a word or a phrase in any number of totally unpredictable situations. You may never, you have no idea when a particular word might be used. You need to be able to access it. And that means lots and lots of valid associations. Some of those are going to be just inherent in the meaning of the word or something like that. Some of those come from associations by experience. But the more associations you have, the easier it is to access the thing.
Using a combination of things like videos made for learners as well as other activities, you can get the best of both worlds. I do loads more stuff on top of just enjoying content in the language that I'm learning. If you want to see how I put this into practice, check out this next video where you'll see what my actual routine looks like.
Okay, so that was Matt Brooks Green's The Problem with Comprehensible Input. And I thought that, okay, first of all, got an interesting resource out of it, so that's cool. Yeah. Gonna just drop that link in chat for anyone who didn't get it earlier. And let's see. Okay, here is a channel I've not actually seen before, but it kind of fits it. Wait a second. Let me decide. Let me see. Okay. We're going to just move over to Evil Dia. Actually, I think I'm gonna... no, I'll give it a couple of minutes. Studying grammar makes you better. This is an Evil Dia react, and a relatively short one, it seems. So why don't we get started here?
What's up, grinders? Welcome.
And for anyone who yesterday missed all or part of my response to his response video where he claimed that I strawmanned him but actually did not give any real example of that, you can, if you go to the live tab on the channel, you will find all 3 parts of it. It ended up broken into 3 parts because there were problems with the camera. It crapped out and I had to restart OBS. But I put a pretty detailed index on there, so...
Back to the channel. So today we're going to be reacting to...
And I posted the link to it in the comments to his video reacting to me, so that could be interesting.
A video from Joe Sema. I've reacted once to him before.
Okay, Okay, the title, Studying Grammar Could Make You Worse. Okay, I mean, yeah, that is potentially true, actually. Not heard of Joe Sema. Small creator. 900, well, it's not, larger than me, but still quite small, 972 subscribers.
I believe he's several thousands of hours into doing the DS route for Spanish, and I've been requested by my Discord to check this video out. So, it's called Studying Grammar Could Make You Worse. But before we begin, before we hit play, make sure you hit that fucking sub button, bro. You guys have stopped subbing recently. I've been warning you at the end of every video. What's going to happen if you don't do that? Well, guess what?
What, Elmo gets it?
Last 3 days of study that you guys have been doing, it's all gone now. It's all gone. That's your fault for not subbing.
Hey, what's up, guys? In today's video, I want to talk about why grammar could actually make you worse in your target language. I'll talk about how I started learning Spanish, especially because I tried to use grammar in the beginning as well. In the first month, I did a combination of Duolingo,
One thing to get into here, I'm sure we're going to end up having it be a topic, is what does it mean to study grammar? A lot of the time, a lot of people have this idea that specifically means like looking at a grammar book, memorizing declensions and conjugations and stuff like that, memorizing specific verb forms and all that kind of stuff. And that is certainly one way to study grammar, but it is not the only way to do it.
conjugation charts and trying to put together...
Does Duolingo even teach grammar?
I mean, I would say it does. It does not teach it in an explicit way, but it actually teaches it in terms of repeated use of structures and filling in the blanks. Actually, not unlike a lot of the cards in the Anki deck that he showed in that one video. So it teaches grammar badly.
I understand,
but it is in there.
Doesn't. It basically gives you templates, which obviously incorporates some type of grammar there, but it just gives you templates and it's like, this is how it works. No, it doesn't even say this is how it works. It goes, here is a template, put it together, and you're just kind of meant to figure out how to slot things together. Like, there's no...
And they're not necessarily even right. I mean, especially now that it's all clankers all the time. Like, Duolingo was not great even when they had human translators. But I will say, I mean, it is just now just totally shit.
Notes, from what I understand. They used to be, but they got rid of them all. So, like, I don't know if you can count Duolingo as teaching grammar. Then again, it's been a long time since I used Duolingo.
Sentences, like, through Google Translator. And I realized there's a lot of missing gaps that I had. First off is that the conjugations for different verbs had different accents. So for hablar, you could say hablé. So you can say something in the past, like I spoke. And I wasn't able to...
I am 970 hours into dreaming Spanish. I was unaware that that existed.
Okay. I'm kind of curious. Have they not used the pretérito in the first like 900 hours, or is he not noticing it? Which, I mean, again, I should say that's not like a criticism. You notice what you notice. That's why going back and watching stuff over and over again is good. If you can do it, if it'll hold your interest for enough time to do it. Because then you will start to notice things that you didn't necessarily notice. So so maybe they actually have the pretérito in there, the pretérito, and he just isn't noticing it. But in fact, it wouldn't surprise me because they do. I mean, that's a whole lot of material.
No concept of Spanish grammar. Okay, the only things
I see. He says that. But I think he probably would be surprised if he actually thought about it. He doesn't necessarily have it in a formal sense because because he hasn't gotten it in that kind of formal theoretical sort of a way. And this isn't really his area, so he isn't used to developing that formal theoretical account of grammar on his own necessarily. But I bet, actually, if Evil Dio were to sit and think about it, there are a lot of basic grammatical concepts in Spanish that he's got. I mean, it's the same thing, like, for example, with comprehensible time. I actually have quite a lot of grammar as a result of it. Not that they've ever specifically said, okay, we're going to talk about word order now. Okay, we're going to talk about verb tenses now and verb aspect and stuff like that, but that it's all there, and as you listen to them talking and saying things, you get an idea of the structures. And when I go back and look at it from that sort of theoretical grammar nerd sort of a way, I can say, okay, I know that Thai is fundamentally a subject-verb-object language that is highly analytical, that is right-branching, meaning modifiers come after the thing that's being modified, that uses a complex system of classifiers, some of which I know, most of which I do not. And a bunch of other things, like the entire, like, there is no verb conjugation in the same way that English has. And there's no infinitive, and you can slot verbs together and stack them, like pom chop, gin pizza. Like, so that's two verbs. Chop, which means like love or like, and gin, which means eat. So, and you can just put those together and you've got I love or I like to eat pizza. So, like, there's a lot of grammar, and I've never looked at. I think I someplace have a whole archive that includes things like the amazing Routledge learners' grammars of various languages, and I bet I could find Thai fairly easily in that. I've not looked at any of that. I'm just going off of the stuff that I've gotten off of just watching carefully the input that I'm getting from them.
I understand about Spanish grammar is usually shit that I've accidentally read in the comments section or someone has just said to me in passing. Apart from that, everything else I recognize from Spanish by just literally context. It's at the point where it's just like, I've heard that sentence in that specific context enough times for me to figure out the entire meaning of that sentence. But even then, sometimes I completely mess it up.
Use the correct intonation when I would read the word out, because I would just read it with like the accent on the A instead of the E. And that's because I really haven't heard the language enough for me to know to put the accent on the E where the actual accent.
Well, I mean, the thing is, hable and hablé are two different words. Those both exist. Hablé is the preterite, I spoke or I talked. And hable, on the other hand, it can be various things, but I mean the most common thing would probably be the imperative, like the formal imperative. Hable usted con él. Talk with him. So those are two actually different things.
is that? Or
Okay, maybe I'm assuming wrong, but before you started dreaming Spanish, because obviously you've done study prior to this, you were aware of that grammar. You were unable to use it in speech, so you're unable to grab the words and then apply the grammar to it in a natural way. It sounds.
We're going to get into this in a minute when I get back from my quick bio break. But this is an example of the sort of misunderstandings that it's actually that make Evil Dia such a useful channel to look at when talking about this stuff. I will be back in just a moment. Quick bio break.
Hi, and welcome to Hyperpolyglotting with Elise. I am Elise, translator, editor, and writer with 20 working languages, and this is where we talk about languages and language learning and all sorts of other stuff, and we play games.
This is Elise with an update on the ongoing Inessa Armand translation project. We now have 37 of the 38 extant essays and speeches by Inessa Armand translated into English for the first time. And we are just short of the halfway mark on the fundraising progress as well. This enrichment of the English language Marxist canon has only been possible with your support, and it's been a real lifeline for me. So anyone who would like to support this project can find links in the description for how to do so, and everybody who has already supported it has my sincerest thanks.
Perfect. Okay, 3 of 4.
還元一級の先というのは、本当に誰も知らない字ばっかりでしょうね。私は
Okay, we've leveled up and it is time to pick another language. Morfar är tröttare än vanligt. Maten är färdig. And let's see what we're doing when we get back. Greek. We're doing Greek when we get back. Ben neredeyse her gün okula gidelim. Fun fact. Turkish. Hello, Shakespeare. How you doing? Fun fact, in Spanish, the word for bishop in chess is alfil. And that actually comes from Arabic. Fil. The same word fil as this. Meaning elephant, because the bishop traditionally was to represent elephant units somehow. Similarly, in Russian, the word for bishop is squad, and that also means elephant.
This is Elise with an update on the ongoing Inessa Armand translation project. We now have 37 of the 38 extant essays and speeches by Inessa Armand translated into English for the first time. And we are just short of the halfway mark on the fundraising progress as well. This enrichment of the English language Marxist canon has only been possible with your support, and it's been a real lifeline for me. So anyone who would like to support this project can find links in the description for how to do so, and everybody who has already supported it has my sincerest thanks.
Ça, c'est ça, che c'est ça, non ça, c'est ça. Sol chi sa che nulla sa, ne sa più di chi ne sa. Ecco.
Bonjour et bienvenue à Hyperpolyglotting avec Élise. Moi, c'est Élise, traductrice, éditrice et écrivain avec 20 ans de travail. Et ça, c'est la transmission en direct ou en jeu déjà. Surtout GeoGuessr en dernier temps. Et parle des langues, de la linguistique, de l'acquisition des langues.
10, 159. Haven't made a huge dent in it, but we're getting there. Okay, gonna do some Chinese now. Nei. Nei. Mann. Yen. Yo. 5. Ducks are drinking wine. Banglas. Banglas? Okay, Banglas is duck. Okay, I have now leveled up. Let's see what the XP situation is now. 10,340 out of 12,500. And as always, viewers can choose my next language for me just with a follow and a $5 to my Patreon.
Sotto le frasche del capanno 4 gatti grossi stanno. Sotto 4 grossi sassi, 4 grossi e grassi gatti. Un généreux déjeuner régénéré des généraux dégénérés. Un généreux déjeuner régénéré des généraux dégénérés. Facile. Sì, ecco, la gente... c'è la gente, sempre che scoprisce che quante lingue parlo. Io sempre avevo l'impressione, diciamo, di che non era così, non era tan così, ma poi dopo di aver visto qualche poliglota in YouTube, una delle cose che avevo scoperte era giustamente che la metodologia usata da quella gente poliglota che non avevo mai conosciuta prima, era più o meno la stessa metodologia che usavo io.
I buy a computer or what? And here's another example. I like to point these out. For this word for or, but sounds vaguely like Hogun and the Hok in Hogun in Korean or Waku in Japanese, and that's because it is the exact same kind of character.
Okay, let me see.
Un chasseur, sa chambre chassée, ses chassés sont son chien de chasse.
Der dicke Dach.
Okay, der dicke Dachdecker deckt dir dein Dach, drum dank dem dicken Dachdecker, dass der dicke Dachdecker dir dein Dach deckt. Hola y bienvenidos al directo de Hyperpolyglotting with Elise. Yo soy Elisa, traductora, escritora y editora y comunicadora social con más de 20 idiomas de trabajo. Y aquí vamos a estar jugando videojuegos, sobre todo GeoGuessr, y hablando de idiomas, la mejor forma de aprenderlo y caleta más. Zwei Zwetschgenzweigen zwitscherten zwei tschechische Schwalben. 3 tristes tigres tragaban trigo en un trigal en 3 tristes trastos.
Oh, I see. This says "Diche ishai fui," which means "Do you want food?" But yeah, are you hungry? That kind of thing. How are the boys? Cocine da boy. Posso Milao. Pote. When is it? Proteine. Protopolo. In the designate.
And I'm back. And so we're looking at studying grammar makes you better. And this is a response to a guy I haven't heard of before who had a thing about how studying grammar can potentially make you worse, which is actually true, because it can actually interfere with your ability to just form sentences naturally.
The E where the actual accent is at. Or
Okay, maybe I'm assuming wrong, but before you started dreaming Spanish, because obviously you've done study prior to this, You were aware of that grammar. You were unable to use it in speech, so you're unable to grab the words and then apply the grammar to it in a natural way. It sounds.
And I was just thinking, because he was just saying that as I left for my little break, that this actually is an example of the sort of misunderstandings that are quite useful to talk about. Because the idea that you're sort of grabbing words and applying grammar to them, I mean, that's not really how we talk. Like, we don't really think about it at that level. Not for the most part. Like, when writing, when editing, sometimes that may come up. But a lot of the time, I mean, it is actually just a spontaneous thing. Like, I could say a sentence that probably has never been uttered before. The gravel pit monster is a shite spinning instructor. Okay, so that was a sentence I think probably nobody has ever said it before, or certainly nobody has had any occasion to say before. And there is grammar, that you have to understand how modifiers go together, how predicate nominatives work, all that sort of thing, where the modifiers go and stuff like that, but you don't think about it. You aren't so much grabbing the words. Well, in that case, I was trying to come up with a weird-ass sentence to use that would definitely be something that nobody had ever uttered before. But, like, the idea that you're sort of grabbing these, like, individual tiles from one of those refrigerator magnet poetry sets and then applying the grammar to it is really not how it works for the most part. I don't.
But you were aware of the grammar that exists, because you're literally describing something that I am unaware of at the moment, okay? Again, 970 hours into Spanish. I get the feeling that probably the best way to do this kind of, heavy input approach, I'm not talking ALG now, I'm just talking heavy input approach, is to be aware of the grammar and then do your heavy input approach. So, like,
not necessarily. I mean, what he's describing here, I mean, this is actually an important thing, an important distinction, because this is the difference between learning and acquiring, as Krashen would put it. Because if you're acquiring it, you aren't necessarily aware of the grammar. You're just applying it, like we do with all sorts of really complicated structures that exist in English that nobody ever taught us, but we just never heard them any other way, and so we just use them instinctively. Being aware of the grammar is where you say, okay, this is an SOV language, and the modifiers come after, and all that sort of thing. That does not necessarily actually result in any ability to use the language at all. And doesn't necessarily, I mean, that can potentially be useful as priming, but really what's more useful as priming is what you're actually acquiring. If you actually is not so much individual words, but structures, which means you're getting the grammar through this exposure to optimal input. You're not necessarily aware of it unless you just have that kind of theoretical grammatical awareness that especially grammar nerds and like English teachers have. But you're acquiring it. Now, having explicit knowledge of it can be useful for what's sometimes called the monitor, which is sort of your internal editor that can notice and help avoid mistakes sometimes. But in terms of acquiring it in the first instance, if you were going to learn a thing, if you were going to have something as priming, the grammar would not necessarily be the thing to go for. It would be words. The grammar would then come because you would have you would know at least some key words.
I don't know, maybe even just spend a couple of hours just reading over a book. You don't have to memorize. I'm not saying go out there and memorize rules. I'm saying just be aware of what exists. Just like have a bird's eye view.
I will say that's not, I mean, that isn't something I totally disagree with. Like knowing, for example, like with Georgian, I have actually, looked over grammar books, not really trying to commit the rules to memory, but trying to see, okay, these are the things that change in a word. This is how words change. And that can be kind of useful, because then you start to notice then you are aware that there are these kinds of changes that a word can go through in Georgian, and it can help you kind of make sense out of the input. That can certainly be useful. I mean, not really trying to commit it all to memory, which is not really going to give you any help at all in terms of comprehending it, but knowing what's there can indeed be useful, I would say.
That way, when you do listen to hundreds of hours of content, your brain's not starting from literally zero. It has something. It's like, well, I'm aware that there's genders, so maybe I should pay attention slightly to that. Like, not even like consciously. It's just you've given.
Let's see, and here we find the limits. Because the thing is, this is not how to engage with comprehensible input in order to get the maximum benefit from it. Not to say, okay, now I'm going to pick out all the genders in the language or something. Because what actually allows you to derive maximum benefit is when you're focusing on the message. When you're focusing on getting the meaning. And the more of the time that you are like deriving meanings from input that you're getting, the more of a clear account you're going to have of how the language works. In addition to like what individual words mean.
Giving your brain something to hook into, you know what I mean? And the fact that he's talking about, accent markers changing, I guess, the tense? Like, I'm probably going to be hyper aware of that now, moving forward. I don't know.
Even how to do accents in the language as well. And the fact that the second to last syllable is most of the time stressed in most words. So using conjugation charts and actually making them by hand didn't really help me much because I barely could even say the word afterwards.
Yeah, but it sounds like you were well aware of how the language conjugates.
Yeah, that's the thing, and that is the difference. This is when people are talking about going through 4 years of university language classes and not being able to do anything in the language, this is what they're talking about. They understand a lot of things about the structures of the language, but not in any way that allows them to apply those structures.
To apply it, but aware of it. I think that makes a big difference at the end of the day. Because when I went into this purposely as part of my experiment, I was not aware of what grammar exists for Spanish. Okay, I was aware to a degree because I've studied Latin before. I'm fluent in Esperanto, so I understand, kind of how the European languages work. I'd heard...
those... Like, European languages is not a useful... it is not a useful category. Because not all European languages are even part of the same family. And Esperanto and Latin, I'm pretty sure, have different word order in a lot of important ways.
Passing before, Spanish has genders and it conjugates. Like, the fact that it conjugates was something I was aware of, okay. But I had not studied what conjugations existed. So I was unable to hear those, and I'm still unable to hear them. Like, even to this point. Like, I hear that the endings change in words. I have no idea why they change. That's about it.
And
the question is, like, what are you, are you not understanding, when you're watching the hours of, Dreaming Spanish, are you not understanding anything? Because that's what that sounds like, if you really are not getting it. If you're really not getting that. But if you are understanding the stuff, then you are subconsciously developing a sense of how these things work, even if you can't summon it to mind consciously. If you're understanding the meanings, that is a question, really. If you're understanding the meanings, then you are beginning to develop some sense of how the grammar works. That is the magic of comprehensible input, really.
the worst is when you would try to put them together. You can't really put together language, especially if you don't know first what the word is, how to say it, and also the grammar of the language. And so you might think that, okay, then the actual solution is that you have to learn some grammar. But that's also a misconception, because grammar is actually the easy part when it comes to learning a language. The harder part is getting the vocabulary surrounding all of that grammar. And you can see this for yourself. If you know most of the vocabulary...
I would tend to disagree with... those are both potentially challenging things in and of themselves. themselves, especially depending on how similar a language is to other languages that you already know. But the real challenge, the thing that input actually makes possible, sorry, is being able to form utterances spontaneously. Like being able to say things like, the gravel pit monster is a shite spinning instructor. You know, sentences you've never heard before, but it comes out grammatically according to the structures of the language without having to think about it, because it just works like that. And that is a mix of things. That is a whole combination of associations that are going on. Ahoy! Dobrze, a ti.
In a sentence, you can, for the most part, figure out what's going on in the sentence.
That is true. Most of the time. I am a perfect example of that. 970 hours into Spanish, don't know the grammar, but I can pick up via context and all the individual words that I know what is going on. I can...
Okay, well, then you actually have more grammar than you realize. See, the thing is, if you... the thing is that you don't necessarily have a conscious understanding of what the grammar is, but in order to be able to get those meanings, you do have to have some internal account of how it works. So you probably know way more grammar than you realize.
And kind of figure that out. Obviously, if I close my eyes, turn away from the screen, I don't have the visuals, my comprehension will drop probably.
Yeah.
But I can figure out generally from context what's going on.
And the grammar that's happening in the sentence as well. Also, the context of the...
See, I mean, this is the thing that a lot of people who are skeptical of input-based methods don't get. There is what's called implicit learning, and it is really crucial to everything, and the thing is, you have no conscious awareness that it's going on. You become aware that it's been going on because of the results. That is how implicit learning works. You just started to notice that you have certain structures that you could just call upon. Now, if you have awareness of how grammars work, if you are, are a grammar nerd, and so you just understand the, basic ideas about how syntax works in different languages and stuff like that, you can then turn around and analytically say, okay, these are things I know about the grammar of the language. If that is not your thing, you're not necessarily going to be able to do that, but if you're understanding it, you are definitely getting at least some of the grammar, even if you can't explain what you've got.
Situation is also important. And if you're trying to interfere with this process by adding in grammar drills and trying to do exercises where they practice a certain grammar concept, that for the most part has like a lot of exceptions, especially if you look at English.
Yeah.
English is a language.
Yeah, I mean, like, gender in Spanish is a great example. Because if you try to learn the basic rule that, for example, something says a, it's feminine, and if it ends in a consonant, for example, it's masculine, well, you got all sorts of problems there, because problema, sistema, diadema, and things like encarnación, información, masturbación. Hey, Riveroon, how you doing? Yeah, which ends in a consonant, but it's feminine. And you have, like, el día, and all these sorts of things. And, see, the point of input-based methods is you sort of learn to take these things as read. You aren't analyzing them on that level. Hello, is that Joella or Joe-L-A? Welcome. I don't think I've seen you here before. Well, I started out by, sort of summing up, yesterday's, reaction to Evil Dia's reaction to me, and how there is now like a fully indexed version. If you go to the live tab on my channel, you can find that whole stream with indexes, timestamps. Oh, okay. Oh, Joel A. Yes, of course, that's also an option. Well, hello. How'd you find us? So, I just talked a little bit about that, and then we watched a video by Matt Brooks Green called The Problem with Comprehensible Input, which was, I mean, he does a very good job of explaining exactly what input is, and it talks about some criticisms of it. Actually, very good discussion of it, and it's the sort of thing that I would very much recommend somebody who is trying to understand what that actually is about and how it works and what it is and what it isn't and stuff like that. Really good video. And also in that context, from that video, I discovered, because he mentioned it, so I didn't really discover it as he pointed it out, a great channel called Comprehensible Input Wiki. Not channel, but a wiki, a great wiki called Comprehensible Input Wiki, which I'd never heard of, but looks like an absolutely amazing resource. So definitely be checking that out. Drop the link in chat just now.
Which that has a lot of exceptions to a lot of rules. It's really hard to apply that rule to every scenario because every scenario is different. The context surrounding it is all different as well. And it may be the case that in this context you have to use a certain form of the verb, but you don't really have to.
Yeah, so you don't need to go out and drill grammar patterns. I would say drill chunks. So specific chunks of the link. I have a whole video on chunks, so I'm not going to go over chunks again. Editor, put a link to it over here or something, okay? But like, you might want to. I wouldn't say I recommend you do it, in fact, like just based on my own experience. Practice chunks because they are complete.
I don't know. Am I the only one, chat, who, when he keeps talking about like drilling chunks, thinks about puking?
Units and thoughts and ideas within the language, okay? And that will help you because then. Rather than trying to grab like individual words and then bits and pieces over here, left, right, and center, and try and slap them together all in the moment, a chunk is just like, well, I know the whole thing goes like this.
Oh, yeah. You watched? Did you watch that whole long ass thing where my OBS crapped out on? I mean, not the OBS, the camera crapped out, and well, thank you. Cool.
And I can just swap out one part
to use it for another. Or for example, you have to say a certain word, a connecting word that usually isn't used, but in that context it is. And I saw this for myself. I was trying to apply English grammar to Spanish, and when I would form together sentences.
See, and this is what the advantage is. See, the thing is, when you're taking input as you find it, and just going for meaning, you start internalizing these structures. Even you aren't aware that you're doing it, because the conscious awareness really is that you understood stuff. Or at least you think you understood something. That is what the conscious experience is like. But the unconscious thing is that oh wow. Oh well, glad to have provided some background music for a long road trip. I know how hard it can be to fill the air on those. Because the thing is, there's what you're consciously aware is going on, what your conscious experience is, and what's going on at a deeper level. And I think a lot of people who are skeptical of input-based methods are thinking that their conscious experience of it, because a lot of the time they have not actually done this to a point where they, to any kind of real endpoint. So they have the conscious experience, and the conscious experience is often kind of underwhelming, and they have not actually really seen the results of the unconscious part of it, because the unconscious part of it you only really become aware of when you start like spontaneously saying things, which takes a while.
I would try to mash together words that wouldn't really make sense, and you would know that if you actually listen to the language.
Yeah, but if you practice it also as a chunk, like that entire piece.
Yeah, the trouble with chunk practice, which like sounds like again, it sounds like puking to me. But okay, I am aware of this concept. It just sounds like puking to me. I mean, it probably always will, because I grew up with Wayne's World. But the thing about that is there you are often just drilling a matching pair. that is not putting it into an overall network of associations, which is what you're getting when you watch tons and tons of input and really engage with it. Don't just, don't just zonk out, but actually really pay attention to everything that you're seeing. Watch everything, listen to everything, really try to take it in. And this is another example of where, like, on the surface, that looks very passive, because it's all going on in your head. But what's going on under the surface is the real thing. What's going on under the surface is what is ultimately going to get you to the point of understanding the language, and a little bit beyond that, to beginning to make spontaneous utterances.
You keep, because like this happens even with, I've seen in your comment section, what was it, your 2,000 hour update or something, where people were saying you're speaking with a very English style of grammar. So even after thousands of hours, you can't avoid it. You literally have to work it out.
See, the thing is, a lot of people have a very sort of stereotyped idea of what it means to work it out, like what it means to study grammar. I thought Days and Words actually did a great job of explaining this in a way that I had not actually seen before. Thought he did an excellent job. It's one of his most recent videos, that there are different ways to study things. It is not always looking in a textbook at charts, conjugation charts or something like that. Observing how things function in nature is a very important form of studying, and it is what you do when you've got a whole lot of input written. And when it comes to grammar, what really helps is written input. Like, find things that you want to read, that you actually enjoy reading in your target language, and that will actually help you level up with your grammar. The more of it you do, the more like grammatically refined you will get.
Like, you have to go in there and go, okay, this is a problematic piece. It's fossilized. Whether I like it or not, I'm gonna have to work on that.
The fossilization is something that actually turns out not to have a lot of evidence for it. It is the justification that in a lot of teaching methods that are not input-based is used to justify, like, interrupting students and correcting them explicitly when they're talking, which mostly results in students being more hesitant to speak. It actually really tends to do more harm than good, but the assumption is that if you don't, get in there early and correct them, these things will be fossilized for all time. And I can tell you, from my own experience, from watching other people, and from studies on the subject, the evidence for that is not overwhelming. I can mention in languages that I have been connected with, since childhood, Japanese, for example, I started learning when I was 8 or 9, roughly. I got really serious about it through my teens. A long time ago. There occasionally I will find little errors that I have internalized, mostly because of the readings that I assumed about a word had, because I'd only seen it in writing. I'd never heard anyone say it. And then I became aware that actually I was reading it wrong, and I immediately changed. That is just normal. People change the way they talk all the time. People change, people are constantly adjusting and updating the way they talk. That's why slang keeps changing as well. Because these things are, none of this stuff is fossilized. None of this stuff is static. These things are in a constant state of flux because we're constantly being exposed to new stuff.
I got that problem in Chinese. I'm slowly working on it. And it's getting better day by day because I'm doing a lot of hours now.
So all the grammar you can learn all just through context, and the main part is just getting the vocabulary and gluing everything together in your mind as you listen to shows and content in your target language. I'll make a caveat that when you get really advanced in a language, maybe grammar could help to actually make yourself aware of a certain concept that doesn't really exist in your native language. For example, something in Spanish is the subjunctive that's not really used in English, but even that I would argue that if you
It's funny how many people say that. But the subjunctive is actually there. We just don't really teach it. Now, I will say that is a thing that actually varies regionally. Like, the present subjunctive is big in North America. In Britain, it's basically, people have just gotten rid of it for the most part. Like, we will say, I demand that he do this, that, and the other in North America. And that is the present subjunctive of do. That's what, but in Britain they say, I demand that he does it. Okay. Yeah, that is a whole different can of worms. Because, I mean, that is a challenge in and of itself, and a lot of it comes down to memorizing. What I would say is really, really helpful with kanji and hanzi is getting to understand the patterns, the way that they're structured. I mean, you have to read a lot, and actually I would say that even though these days handwriting, kanji, and hanzi, and hanja is kind of on the way out to a certain extent because people are just using devices and using phonetic inputs and stuff like that, to the extent that, like, a lot of people, native speakers, have trouble handwriting these characters just because they never have occasion to do it. But in terms of really getting used to the structures, understanding how they work, actually handwriting isn't bad, because each of those components is important. And those components can help you remember the meaning. They often will give you a heads up about the pronunciation. And then the rest of it is you just gotta read a lot. Like, you just gotta read and memorize. Like, especially if you focus on characters that relate to things that you're actually interested in. Because one of the things about these character-based languages, about like kanji in Japanese or hanzi Chinese, is that people's knowledge of them varies depending on what field they're in. People who are physicists or botanists will have one set of, will often have some specialized kanji that they know because they come up in their field, but that other people don't know. Because it doesn't come up in their field. Like lawyers, for example, have all sorts of specialized kanji and specialized readings of kanji to make distinctions that basically nobody but fucking lawyers need. So, like, focusing on characters that are useful for things that you're interested in can be a good way to get a start on them. But really, I mean, it comes down to a lot of reading. And one thing I would say, if you have, like, a Kindle, you can get Japanese ebooks on Kindle. You can get Chinese ebooks to some extent as well. And in both cases, you can get a dictionary. A built-in, like, you can just download for free a dictionary that's built in. And when you hover over or put your finger on a word or a character in whatever you're reading, you will get the dictionary entry often enough, and it will give you the reading of it, which is really, really handy when you're running into unfamiliar kanji or something like that, which I mean, no matter how good you are at Japanese, even if you're a native speaker and a, like, very well-read native speaker, you will always be running into kanji you've never seen because there are just so many of them. Hey, Emily. So, I mean, ebooks are actually not a bad idea. And also, I mean, one thing, depending on what your level is, this can be a varying utility, would be to listen to ebooks at the same time as you're reading listen to audiobooks at the same time as you're reading the text. That can really kind of help you with pronunciation. It can help you with the readings of characters. It can help you with a whole lot of things.
have enough input in data, you should be able to figure it out, and you won't really need to study that grammar specifically. So it might be a good idea just to make yourself aware that there is a subjunctive in Spanish, and that there's accents, and that they change the way words are actually said, but try to apply them.
Okay, so if someone is watching my videos and you're playing with the idea of doing the ALG approach or not, or just a heavy input approach or not, I'm going to disagree with everything he said right now. Please make yourself aware of the grammar. You will save yourself potentially.
I mean, it's really wild that he says these things, because I learned a lot about him that I did not know from his response video to me. And what I learned is he's speaking about this from a point of view of really not a lot of... He speaks very confidently about these things, but it's not from a point of view of having gotten a whole lot of results with it. Like, I mean, the one language that, other than English, that he has a really high level in is one that is designed to have the most intuitive, like, basically the most predictable and intuitive grammar of anything. Esperanto. So it is not a great, so it is really not a great model, specifically because it is designed for Indo-European speakers to pick up really easily, like especially speakers of major Western European languages. So, like, he's giving these tips, but he is not doing this from the point of view of, like, it's like he is at sort of the middle of the mountain, having never actually made it to the top of it, and confidently giving detailed instructions on how to actually get to the top of the mountain despite not having done it. And yeah, your mileage can and will vary in that case.
Hundreds of hours. I'm almost positive about that at this point. You don't have to practice it. You don't have to sit there drilling it. You don't even have to do chunking like I recommended, okay? Just be aware of what exists so that when you're listening, you've given your brain just...
I mean, I will say on that isn't a terrible idea, but really not obsessing over it. Especially, I would actually wait on that sort of thing. Because, especially if you've got beginner-oriented, comprehensible input-type content, then just let that wash over you. Later on, when you're already understanding a fair bit, then, you know, getting some awareness of what's going on, which you can also get through just reading in the language. That is my main disagreement with a lot of, with the ALG approach when it comes to languages where where the learner actually is familiar with the writing system broadly. I have always used an approach that is very reading heavy, and I've found it very beneficial. Though I do see the value in delaying reading when you're having to do with a completely new writing system, like Thai, for example, which has a unique writing system. No other language uses that exact system, though there are similar systems in use throughout the region.
Thing to hook into, because even now, I'm telling you, at 970 hours of no grammar study in Spanish, I am still completely unaware of how words fit together in this language.
See, this is a thing I would really challenge. I think he's more aware than he realizes. He can't explain it verbally. But there's a lot of grammar in any language that native speakers cannot explain verbally and are unaware of. Like, think about it. This one is one that shows up as a meme every once in a while because it's such a good example. There is an order there's an order for adjectives in English. There is a strict order, and if you listen to people stack adjectives, native speakers of English stack adjectives, they will basically always observe this order. Even though nobody's ever taught it to us. We don't even know we're doing it. It's non-native speakers who notice this about us and then say, hey, wait a second, so you put, like, you put the adjectives in a certain order. Why do you do it like that? And it's like, I didn't know I was doing that. There is so much stuff that you will be aware of without verbalizing that I would say, like, sit down, like, I mean, he's actually seen one of my videos, so if he sees this one, think about it a second. Think about, think about the sentences that come to mind, because he said he's starting to get some spontaneous speech. Cool. That is a huge landmark, and just let it flow together and see what you notice about the way that the sentences are laid out. Don't think about it too much. Just let it be spontaneous. Because the thing is, you are developing an understanding that you aren't consciously aware of. When I'm talking like this, I'm not sitting here working out sentence structure. I'm just saying things. I have meanings that I'm conveying, and I'm saying those things. The sentence structure is the sentence structure of English without me giving a whole lot of thought to it. Or really any, actually.
I feel like this is just terrible advice. Just overall. Sure, you could do this for thousands of hours, 2, 3, 4,000 hours. Eventually your brain will figure it all out. But why make your brain go through all that when you can just speed it up?
Because the thing is, the journey is important. The journey is actually important. The journey is what actually really cements this stuff in your head. The journey is what actually makes you the best possible speaker of the language that you can be, because it is what hooks things up. It's it's the difference. I'm going to use another fucking techie analogy from my limited repertoire of them. It's the difference between buying a PC and actually going to Micro Center would be the place around here, or whatever the place is where you are, and saying, okay, and looking at the ratings for the components and consulting with people and saying, okay, this is the CPU I want. This is the DRAM that I want to get. This is I want this motherboard, I like this form factor, and understanding all those choices in there. And all of those things, in terms of what you get out of that experience, yes, it is easier to just go and buy, just buy a fucking Dell or something like that. But you have gained a lot from the experience, especially if you want to understand how these things work, from the experience of actually going in there and putting it together and knowing how much force you need to apply in order to get the fucking CPU cooler to stay on. And all that kind of stuff. You understand more as a result of it. The journey is the point. You're trying to skip over the journey, but the thing is that the journey, the experience is different depending on whether you make the journey or not, and the outcome will be different too. Let's say you're, it's the difference between. Except it isn't really the same. Actually, I was going to use a bad analogy, because I was going to say the difference between, say, flying from Sydney to Melbourne or driving. And the thing is, the difference is that in both cases you get to Melbourne. So that is actually, that is a bad analogy, because the thing is, you don't get the same, you don't get that same outcome in both cases. They aren't equivalent.
Up a little bit. Okay, I understand. You don't want to study grammar. You're not a grammar person. Okay, you don't want to do flashcards. You don't want to do.
I mean, it actually sounded like he is kind of a grammar person and did intentionally study grammar. He's just saying, and quite correctly, that this is not really the way that people develop grammar.
You just want to sit there, enjoy, listen to the language. Then watch some videos about grammar in the language, at least. Just get an idea. And it will help you along the way, trust me.
For real time, using rules or certain exercises doesn't really work. When natives
there are actual studies that back up what he's saying here.
Speak, they don't really think about any rules or anything like that. They just continue speaking. And so if you're stuck 3 sentences behind trying to figure out how to use the subjunctive in this next sentence that you want to say, you'll just...
Yeah, I mean, that is the difference between the sort of knowledge you get when you're explicitly studying grammar in the way that a lot of people think of when they think about studying grammar, versus the way you get it when you acquire it through input.
Yeah, but we're not native speakers. So I don't know why anyone keeps pretending that we're making native speakers with this method.
Well, no, the point is that the idea is to actually approximate that as closely as possible. And the way you do that is by leveraging what's called the language acquisition device, the collection of things in the brain that are part of taking input and turning it into competence in language.
You don't sound like a native. Like, you sound great when you speak Spanish. I've heard you speaking, but you're...
well, like, there are so many different ways that native speakers speak Spanish. There's so many different accents. I've not heard this guy speak Spanish. So I can't judge. But, like, somebody who is really only just starting out in learning Spanish, I would caution against being too, assuming that you know exactly how it's pronounced. Because the thing is, people in Chile talk different from people in Bolivia, and those are neighboring countries. They both sound totally different from their neighbors in Argentina. There are more subtle differences when you go a little bit northeast to Uruguay. I have no idea what people in Paraguay sound like. I've never really met anyone from Paraguay. And then when you go north to like Colombia and Venezuela and Mexico, it sounds totally different. Like, so I would not make too many assumptions there. There are so many different ways that Spanish can sound. Like, and we're not even getting into the Caribbean islands, who have their whole own take on it.
To pick out you're not a native. Like, I've had natives listen to you and they're like, just, yeah, you're not a native. This is the problem.
Well, yes, but is he saying that he has actually finished the process? It does not sound like he is.
Okay. I have not found a secondary speaker of a language who sounds like a native to a native, except in some super rare instances.
So what? Like, that isn't the point.
Where the person has literally lived in that language more than their own native language. They've probably heavily studied phonetics. And they might even be musicians. They're just attuned to sounds. Okay?
Yeah, what's the relevance of this? That doesn't change the fact that the underlying process is the same. The desired outcome is the same, namely the ability to spontaneously generate novel utterances in your target language, following the structures of that language without having to give a lot of thought to exactly how those things go together. That's the goal. Yeah, a lot of people will achieve that goal, but still be distinguishable from native speakers. They won't, like, pass. So who gives a shit? Like, how many... there are vanishingly few examples where that is going to be a requirement. The point is, the process, the fundamental mechanism is the same.
And they've just spent an insane amount of hours in language. So, like, this chasing native thing, like, I get it. We all want to be the best that we can. But if to try and get that little fish way down at the end there, okay, if we have to give up all of this, you know...
What are you giving up, though?
All this, speed that we could get just by literally just...
Like, what's your fucking hurry? I really do not understand this obsession with speed. This is... and this assumption... that if you rush it, you're going to get equivalent results. Like, what's your hurry? What exactly? And as I was saying, other people who weren't here for in the first hour, I was saying this in the first hour. The thing about speed is, you can say something is a slow approach if there's a way to get an equivalent or better outcome, that is faster. But if the alternatives that are supposedly faster result in worse outcomes, then it isn't a slow approach, it's just that the thing takes a certain amount of time.
Aware of the grammar.
And why are we so obsessed with this with speeding up how long it's going to take? Like, what are you going to do with Spanish that you're in such a hurry for?
For the hope, the little carrot at the end that we might sound like a native, I don't think it's worth it.
Get law.
Why not? Well, I mean, he hasn't explained what you're giving up other than speed. Like, you're giving up speed, but, what are you gaining? Have you considered that? Because what you're doing when you're actually, like, taking the time that it takes to do it properly, to develop the network of complicated associations and all that stuff in your head, that is an enriching thing in and of itself. Like, this is like it is, even if speed were really, if you could get an equivalent outcome faster. And I mean, I feel like he's kind of conceded when he says this, that you can't. That the faster result is going to be a worse result. But first of all, I don't see why speed is so important here, and why it doesn't just take what it takes. But the other thing is, quite simply, you gain a lot of things from doing it properly, taking it slow, really being patient. There's a lot that you gain from that.
And you won't be able to have a fluid conversation with an actual native speaker. All that said, if you guys are interested in one-on-one coaching, you guys can sign up in the description box below, and we can figure out a nice custom plan to get you to the next level in your language. Also, if you...
Wait, aren't you like the ALG guy? Wouldn't your advice be just, bro, sit down, immerse, bitch? I'm not trying to take your clients away. I'm just.
Well, yes, but even within that, there are things. There's immersion and there's immersion. There's input and there's input. It is not the same thing no matter what input you use. All these things matter. I don't know anything about this guy, but there's tons of stuff that you could benefit from, in terms of the advice of somebody who's been there and knows what they're doing about it. When you're using input-based methods, because the input isn't the method. It's still a matter of how you use it. It's still a matter of how you engage with it, what you do with it, what input you're looking at. There's all sorts of reasons why somebody's advice could be useful who's done it before. I don't know anything about this guy. I just want to say, and also I will say, I offer that kind of advice as well. I mean, okay. Interesting question. See, I will say, okay, when it comes to subtitles, I actually give a slight edge to Language Reactor there, because I like that you can actually set it up so that you aren't staring at it all at once. But I think there are benefits from both. I think overall, I mean, those subtitles can definitely be helpful, especially if they're well translated. Though fundamentally, if you are looking at optimal input, you won't need subtitles. Like, if you're looking at optimal input, you will be able to work it out in your head, understand basically what you're seeing, without actually having it translated for you. Your brain will just kind of work it out by looking at it. So I would say, I mean, if you're dealing with optimal input, you don't really need the subtitles. Subtitles can be helpful, I think. Especially target language subtitles, because they can really help you get an idea, to matching letters to sounds and things like that, and that's important. They can also potentially, help you get there in terms of noticing, filling in gaps in your understanding if you're not looking at optimal input. If you're not looking at input that is right on that edge where you can understand everything, though there's new stuff in it. But, yeah, I mean, I think, I will say, I have liked what I've seen with LingoPie. There's some things that I would change about it, especially human translators. Human translators would be absolutely essential, because there are definitely, mistranslations in there that a human translator would not have made. And I would set up the subtitles a little bit differently. I would make the default so target language is up top and bottom third is, you know, the native language, or the other way around, so that you aren't forced to see them both at the same time. So that it's possible to sort of selectively view whichever ones you want to view. Like, maybe you want to mostly watch target language subs, but when the but every once in a while you want to look down and check the English, and then you have them in different parts of the screen, and that works. But overall, I think it's a useful thing. But I also think that when you have truly optimal input, which is a very difficult thing to get and is a moving target, then you really won't. Well, it's. Let me go back on that. It's not difficult as a whole. It depends on the language. It heavily depends on the language. In some languages, it's actually pretty easy to get. But if it is optimal, then you don't really need subtitles. And I think you get more benefit if you don't use them in that situation. But they can be beneficial, certainly. As far as speed advantage, I've never gone and, like, paced it out. You know, I've learned a number of languages. I have 20 working languages that I use as a translator. But I've never really thought about speed. It was just, you know, I get there when I get there. So I don't feel like speed is all the... I don't understand the obsession with speed, to be honest. You know, it takes how long it takes. It is a process. It is a natural process that goes on in your brain. And the journey of getting there is actually as important as the destination, and in some ways more important, I'd say.
Kind of curious, like, well, what would the advice be, bitch? Just sit down and listen to more content. Got some good content.
See, I mean, this is where you see that he does not really understand what we're talking about when we talk about, like, input-based methods or ALG or any of this stuff. Because there are things, like, again, there are things that there is useful advice, because it all depends on what you do with it and what you're looking at and everything.
Over here, I got a list of anime I recommend. No, I'm just joking. You know what would be really funny? You would be absolutely batshit funny.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, I know. There are so many people who are just obsessed with it. I mean, that is like, they'll be like, yeah, you could do it the input way, but my way, where you memorize a bunch of words by rote, yeah, if you pay me money for the list of words to memorize, that will get you there faster, which I don't think it actually will, dog, but I also don't think it will get you there at all. And also, what's the hurry? Like, what is the real world necessity for speed here?
If by the end of like 2,003 hours of me doing, you know, ALGDS style, imagine if I just came away with like a native sounding Argentinian accent, and I've been saying all this shit for like thousands of hours. I'd be like,
that is more likely than he realizes. Like, I mean, especially if he is specifically, like, okay, Dreaming Spanish actually does a pretty good job of representing the diversity of the Spanish language. So, but there is Argentine stuff in there. But, I mean, he speaks about that like that is a totally unbelievable outcome, but it actually happens a fair bit. If there's a psychological aspect. Actually, Luca Lampariello has done some videos talking about this aspect, because, I mean, because he has a very North American sounding pronunciation when he speaks English, despite being a native speaker of Italian. Absolutely, you know, beautiful English pronunciation if you're going for, like, not no clear indication as to country of origin or whatever. And he talks about how there's a psychological aspect that gets into this. But, like, we have the phonetic apparatus to make all of the sounds. It's just a matter of developing the ability to do certain things with them. So that is, he could very much. If he actually really sticks at it and watches a lot, and specifically sticks to like Argentine input, Argentine music, Argentine videos. Argentina is a good example because they have a huge film industry. Actually, some very good movies come out of there. Lots of good music as well. Yeah, you could absolutely see him coming out of that. Yeah, with something of an Argentine accent if he really sticks to it.
Awkward! But I just don't see it happening. Like, I'll try my best, but yeah. I don't know why people are just so against grammar. Like, you don't have to memorize it, just be...
Well, there's a difference between being against grammar and having a fundamentally different approach to acquiring it. Like, this is funny because just a minute, yesterday in this video, he was like, why does anyone think I'm against comprehensible input? Everyone's so all or nothing or whatever. And it's like, here he is saying, why are people against grammar? It's like, it's not about being against grammar. It's about how you actually acquire it. There are lots of ways to study grammar. You could study grammar, the grammar of Australian English, by watching his feed. Well, that would be a way of studying it because all of the grammar is right there. The grammar is everywhere. It's a fractal. Wherever the language is present, the grammar is there.
Where? I think I've said what I wanted to say. If you guys like this video, let me know down in the comment section below. By the way,
Okay. So that was interesting. Okay, what have we haven't got a whole lot of time at this point. Okay, this could be an interesting one to look at because we were just talking about in the Matt God, what was his name?
Konnichiwa.
Where is that? Where's that video? Matt Brooks Green, that's him. He was talking about like using chatbots as a source of input to learn, and this is a channel I've never heard of before called Taki Talks Japanese. Japanese comprehensible input. Gonna drop this into chat for anyone who's interested in the channel or the video. And he's saying that slow Japanese and AI channels are ruining your listening. Okay. Let's check it out. As we round out like the last 10-ish minutes. And let me drop a link here. Since we have at least one new person, to my Discord, where we can keep in touch in between streams. And also to some of my various projects. There we go. And the free $10 tier 1 month gift sub to my Patreon because a friend of mine bought 20 of them by accident. So I have tons of them and I am handing out the bounty. But so this is Taki Talks Japanese. 日本語学習者向けにわざとゆっくり話してるチャンネルってありますよね。そうですね。わざとゆっくり話してるチャンネルも結構多いですね。
日本語学習者向けにわざと
let's see. Okay. There are English subs on here for anyone, and I'll put them on there. So, that people, non-Japanese speakers on here can also follow along as I comment on this.
ゆっくり話してるチャンネルってありますよね。あとは AI が話してるチャンネル、
スロッ
あれ
プチャンネル。
で勉強するのはやめた方がいいです。
Yeah, I mean, especially like fucking slop channels. What's the appeal? Listen to actual people who have actual things to say. Yeah, Japanese is very challenging. There's at least one other person in here, like Brian in chat, definitely has actually climbed that particular mountain. It is a very challenging one when you get started. It actually continues to be rather challenging through the middle. But I mean, it really actually it seriously pays off when you get to the top of it, because it's just really I have to say, it's just cool to be able to, when you realize you actually just understand this stuff. I mean, I still remember when I was like 8, listening to my cousin speaking Japanese on the phone, not understanding a word of it. Or no, I was younger than that. I would have been like 6 or 7. He would be speaking Japanese on the phone, and I didn't understand anything. But I thought it was the coolest shit ever, and I totally wanted, I wanted to be able to do that. And so, like, it is an absolute thrill that to realize I can that I got there.
なんで聞き取りやすくていいじゃんって思った人もいると思うんですけど、今日はゆっくりな日本語とか AI 音声っていうのがみんなの上達を遠回りさせてるっていう話を、僕も英語学習で痛い思いをしたことがあるので、その実体験と一緒に話していきます。
Okay, and one thing I will say, these are good translations, actually, I'm finding so far. In this channel, which is one of the things that I find that takes a long time to really get good at in Japanese, is really understanding how phrases are, how like expressions are constructed and stuff. And I find good translations can be very helpful there to really kind of link things up. I mean, as a translator, that's been essential to me. But like just in terms of being able to understand how an expression goes together, because the structure of it is very different in a lot of respects to English or like Western European languages in general.
日本語っていうのはネイティブが無意識に使ってる自然なリズムっていうのがあります。
Yeah, very true. And I mean, part of that is due to pitch, accent, but it's also, if you listen, like, there's a way that phrases are broken up. And some of that has to do with, like, creating gaps for aizuchi, which is where, if you watch, in Japanese people in conversations will sort of low-key interrupt each other, just as a way of saying, yeah, I'm following you, so desu ne, hai, naruhodo. And the other person who is talking will consciously put in breaks. 昨日はですね、はい、そう。ローソンに行く途中で見たことなんですけど、そうですね、そうですね。And you will find that there are these natural breaks in it. And that is part of this rhythm, and clankers don't have it.
自然なスピードで話すとき、この音の工程とか強弱のパターン、あとはリズムっていうのが自動的に正しく発音されるんですけど、だけどゆっくり話そうとするとそれが崩れるんですね。
That is very true. The slower you go, the less rhythm there is. Like, I mean, you notice this. This is true not just in speech. I mean, I've noticed this when I'm playing around with like the beat synthesizer, when I'm composing music and stuff. And if you put it, or you put a really low, if you put something at a really low speed, it actually becomes really difficult to work out what the rhythm even is. Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say all languages are very much a continuous journey. But there is like the scaling, when I say like the scaling of the mountain, I mean getting to the point where, say, you can turn on the TV in Japan and you understand what they're saying, and you know, if there are people talking behind you on the bus or something like that, or somebody talks to you, you understand what's going on. Like, which is already, when you look at it from the start, it's like, how the hell does anyone ever understand this? Because everyone seems to be talking very fast, there's all sorts of shit going on. But, like, you get to a point where you are able to exist in the language. Like, you get to a point where you can swim. Yeah, you can swim. You can develop your swimming. We're mixing the shit out of these metaphors. I don't care. It's my channel. I will mix metaphors if I want to. You know, you can get to the point where you can get in the water and you can swim just fine, but of course you can continue to get better at it if you want to. So yeah, I mean, I think it's always a continuous journey, but there is a point you get to where you have kind of arrived at in a completely new place, because you already are understanding virtually everything and are able to interact and do so in a way that is not like painful to listen to for very like grammar obsessed native speakers. Yeah, I mean, it's all a continuous journey. Like, I mean, I've been a professional user of Japanese for over 20 years now. I'm still learning new things. I mean, especially like, you know, related to the kanji kente, like studying all sorts of extremely obscure kanji and jukugo and stuff like that. I mean, every language is a universe. There's all sorts of stuff to learn. And no matter where you get, there's always going to be something new, especially because languages are constantly innovating. And that's not a bad sentiment on which to knock off for today. Thank you to everyone who joined in. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks especially to the new people. I do hope you keep coming back. I will be back at 4:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time on Friday. And I look forward to seeing you then.